If just one of the litany of problems created by Todd Blanche could sink his nomination to be Attorney General, it will be the issue of Donald Trump's $1.8 billion slush fund. Two Republican senators on the Judiciary Committee, Thom Tillis and John Cornyn, have hinged their yes votes for Todd Blanche on the fund being formally and officially killed, dead, over. I'm impressed by Tillis and his written questionnaire for assurances that the slush fund is in fact dead. Todd Blanche continued to stonewall. He would not or could not answer basic questions about how the fund was created and whether or not it would be revived in the future if Donald Trump orders it revived. In another sign that the fund is very much still alive, there was a court hearing on it today. A federal judge is looking for the same assurances. Both Republican senators whose votes Blanche cannot afford to lose if he wants to be the Attorney General signaled to reporters that they are not satisfied with what Blanche has told them. Here's what Senator Tillis had to say to our network.
If the vote were today, would you be a no?
Well, I've said the 1776. I don't know how better I can communicate other than the 1776 fund has to have a fork stuck in it.
And at this moment,
I could say we need 86 to 1776.
Also in the spotlight today is the damage that Todd Blanche has done to the Department of Justice with the purging of hundreds of career civil servants. Here's a testimony from a former DOJ employee who worked on Jack Smith's teams and was fired by Todd Blanche. Peter Carr, warning about the impacts of the purge at a forum held by Democrats on the Judiciary Committee.
But these firings aren't just unlawful. They're also incredibly damaging to the department and its law enforcement mission. The men and women of the Justice Department handle some of the most complicated and important cases in the government. They're expected to do this and not think about the consequences. They can't do that anymore. This administration has fired or pushed out hundreds of the department's best people for simply doing their jobs. People who did everything by the book. They just happen to work on cases that people now in power don't like. Or they refuse to move forward with cases where the facts and the law didn't support criminal charges.
I want to bring in former Department of Justice pardon attorney Liz Oyer. She testified last week against Todd Blanche and his confirmation, and now she is feeling the effects of that firsthand. We're also joined by Justice and Intelligence reporter Ken Dilanian. Liz, first of all, who appoints prosecutors to work on cases? Is it like circle time where you raise your hand and say, I want this one, I want that one, or are you assigned by someone above you?
You are assigned by someone above you. You don't ask questions. You take the cases that are given to you.
So who would have been above the men and women that worked on Jack Smith's cases other than Jack Smith?
So in that situation, I'm not sure who assigned those specific prosecutors to those cases, but what I can tell you is that they were assigned based on their experience, based on the needs of the case, by people that they reported to. They were fulfilling and carrying out the duties that were assigned to them. Todd Blanche was asked when he was confirmed or going through the confirmation process for Deputy Attorney General about whether those people needed to fear for their jobs, and he said no. He promised that he was not going to fire a single person based on the cases that they were assigned to work on. Fast forward 1 year, and he is gleefully gloating and bragging about the fact that he purged, in his words, the department of all of the men and women who ever touched any case involving Donald Trump, as well as all of the January 6 associated prosecutors and career staff.
Ken Delaney, he used the word canned, and he was talking to Matt Schlapp, who runs CPAC, an organization that's currently under investigation for potential abuses of taxpayer money by the government of Hungary. But I'm off topic here. My question, what I'm trying to understand is if you were investigating a crime where the target of the investigation had absconded military plans that dealt with Iran, and you had expertise on the counterintelligence side with Iran, would you have an option? I mean, would it be optional to work on that case, or would you be brought into that case if that was your expertise in a national security and counterintelligence context?
Nicole, you're trying to apply logic to what is essentially an authoritarian way of approaching this. That's what the Trump administration is doing. And just a word about Peter Carr, the person whose clip you played there testifying. Peter Carr, I've known him for a long time. He was Robert Mueller's spokesperson as well. He is a Mormon who used to work for Orrin Hatch. Okay, so I don't know what his personal politics are, but I bet at one point he was a Republican. So just so people understand, this isn't a bunch of left-wing deep staters who are now complaining that, you know, Donald Trump has come in and cleaned house and gotten the secret conspirators out of the government. They have wrought havoc in the Justice Department by getting rid of experienced, career, nonpartisan people. That people, you know, even if people volunteered for, in some cases, I'm sure they did, for the Jack Smith investigation, that investigation was conducted pursuant to the facts and the law. There's nothing that the Republicans have produced in the last year and a half that contradicts that. They haven't laid a glove on it. There's no evidence of misconduct, of any wrongdoing, of anything that deviated from Justice Department policy in that investigation. Donald Trump and his people just don't like it because they accuse Donald Trump credibly of crimes. And we all know that had those cases gone to trial, there was a very good chance that Donald Trump would have been convicted in either the classified documents case or the election case or both. And so what you have here is an effort to purge people who dared to cross Donald Trump. I attended the speech that he gave early on in his term at the Justice Department, and it was very disconcerting to see Donald Trump in those hallowed halls just trashing the people who worked there, and knowing that his portrait is now hanging in those halls. And now, a year and a half later, we're seeing the fruits of this project.
It's such an important point that the people who are being purged either have no politics, or if you worked for Orrin Hatch, you might have actually been a Republican at one time. Hell, I was a Republican at one time.